Previously on Sugarland.
The system said you were free unless convicted of a crime. And so that's how they was able to get slavery back.
That's the whole idea. You scare a bunch of people into behaving a certain way, whatever that is, by creating terrible penalties for some small group of people who engage in the thing you don't want other people to do.
We used the testimony that the school district and the historical commission cited as the reason to call it bullhead camp. To me, I'm not sure why this isn't a giant scandal.
So because there wasn't any archaeological studies, the concerns are where these people buried. Those homeowners like to know where these bodies are they living on grave sites?
Okay, so, I'll just show you here. Hang on.
Portia Harper is walking us through her apartment in Las Vegas, Nevada, over Zoom. Colorful paintings and bright tapestries line the walls.
Don't mind my kitchen. Yesterday was my birthday, and I had a few friends over last night.
She passes under a string of potted ivies hanging in the doorway to the living room and points her iPhone camera at what we've called to see.
So this is just kind of what I've been working on.
A wall in her kitchen is covered in photos, death certificates, and manila folders.
This is my family here. This is my mother when she was really little. This was my grandmother and my grandfather when they were still in Germany.
Portia pans down the display, and I feel like I'm looking at a 3D version of the family trees we spent the past 2 years building on Ancestry. She crouches and points to a picture of a young black man in a purple baseball hat, tacked up just above the ground.
Way down here next to the dog bowl, this is my brother who just passed away.
Portia tells us about her relatives as she scans up the wall. With each row, we climb further and further back into her family history. Up in the top left, she points to a white piece of paper folded into thirds.
This one here, my son, he doesn't like this picture, so I keep it closed.
She flips back the folds, revealing a black and white picture of her third great-granduncle, who was born around the start of the Civil War. It's not actually scary, but I can see how the highlights and shadows around his face might have frightened Kai, her 3-year-old.
Portia began looking into her family history about 6 years ago for the same reason many of us do. She wanted to know where she came from. Growing up, it wasn't something her relatives discussed. She says her grandfather was mainly raised by his grandparents.
I didn't really know much about who we were, especially because my grandfather, Robert, he didn't really know what happened to his siblings or if he had siblings, or he didn't really know. So he never wanted to talk about it. And so it was always kind of taboo to dig in our family, kind of dig into our background a little bit. And so once I got the go ahead, I went ahead.
By piecing together dozens of records and oral histories, Portia managed to trace her family back 6 generations. And in the process, she uncovered a mystery, a relative who just disappeared.
Portia found records from the 1880s and 90s showing that her great-great-great-grandfather, Ephraim, who went by Eph, was living with his wife and sons in Gonzales County, Texas, surrounded by their whole extended family. But by the turn of the century, Eph seemed to vanish. The family was thrown into chaos. His wife, who was pregnant at the time, fell off the radar too. And by 1900, Eph's sons were living with his in-laws.
The question of where Eph had gone haunted Portia. She wondered if he decided to leave his family, or if somehow that decision was made for him. It struck a chord because Portia grew up without a father too.
More than anything, the absence of that male figure in our family is kind of more generational. The only real male figure I've ever had in my life has been my grandfather.
Now she's raising her son on her own. She was fascinated to see that pattern traced back so far in her family tree.
And as Portia was searching for answers about Eph, she found us.
That's because once we proved the Sugarland 95 cemetery was misnamed and that the real Bullhead Camp Cemetery was still out there somewhere in Sugarland, we tried looking for it. We studied old maps and development proposals. We reread and cross-referenced every mention of the camp we could find. And we started looking for information about the people who could be buried there, people who labored and died under the Texas convict lease system.
We believe Eve Harper is one of them.
This is Part 8 of Sugarland, an investigative podcast series presented by the Texas Newsroom. We're your hosts, Naomi Reed
and Brittany Martin. Eve Harper was first pulled into the convict lease system during his early 20s. In 1884, he was charged with stealing a dozen cows from a white man in Fayette County, Texas, and he spent his 2-year sentence working on Littleberry Ellis's sugar plantation in Sugarland.
Like we talked about in our last episode, Ellis's former plantation is where the remains of the Sugarland 95 were found.
While there, Eve likely spent long days harvesting cane and enduring the brutal conditions we've discussed. Records show Eve was punished a few times, but he survived his sentence and ultimately returned home. 3 months later, he was married and on his way to starting a family.
For nearly 12 years, Eve Harper's life seemed pretty normal. But then in 1898, he was once again convicted of cattle theft. This time, he was leased to a different convict camp in Sugarland on Edward H. Cunningham's plantation. Eve arrived on Valentine's Day and was there almost exactly 1 year before he died of remittent fever.
5 months later, the Brazos River flooded and the Sugarland camps were inundated. News reports from the time said that convicts from Cunningham's Bullhead, or number 4 camp, had been moved to a high hill on his plantation and were in, quote, no possible danger. According to Eve Harper's prison records, he died on Cunningham's number 4 camp, the Bullhead camp. So it stands to reason he's buried in the Bullhead Camp Cemetery, the real one, that still hasn't been found.
We shared all of this with Portia.
I'm a firm believer of when you know better, you have a certain obligation, a moral obligation to do better. And I feel like if my great-great-great-grandfather really is buried at that Bullhead camp, for them to go ahead and just literally cover up the additional site, they're just as guilty as the people who did it initially. And for them to rename the Sugarland 95, the Bullhead camp, it literally erases history. And that's a part of history that my family comes from.
It's actually a part of Portia's family story in more ways than one. Years later, in the early 1940s, Eve Harper's grandson lived with his wife and children in the company town of Sugarland. In fact, Portia's grandfather was born there.
I was looking at my great-grandfather's World War II draft record. I believe it's listed Sugarland Industries as his employer. It just made me kind of just want to do a little bit more research into Sugarland Industries. And that's where I learned of the Sugarland 95 and a lot of the work that Reggie Moore was doing at the time. But never in a million years had I put the pieces together and thought, it'd be so closely related.
Eve's grandson likely had no idea his grandfather had labored and died on the same land he called home, and no indication that his grandfather was buried somewhere beneath the soil he lived and worked on, his grave unmarked and unacknowledged.
If no one's looking for it, then again, it just goes back to that accountability. And now I understand that, we may never find those actual remains, but there has to be some kind of schematics or something to show the land before Imperial Sugar was built on it.
Portia's family is living proof of how time and again history has been erased, revised, and retold to paint white people in a more heroic and positive light. Redemptive white history is a staple in Sugarland and created the image most people have of the city today.
Sugarland's journey from the capital of convict leasing in Texas to a sweet company town was wild and messy. According to news reports at the time, Ellis and Cunningham's sugar plantations relied heavily on convict labor and saw great success throughout the 1880s and 90s. As Ellis got older, his sons took over the family business. But by 1906, both sons had, bizarrely, been shot and killed. Ellis's widow was left with her family's debts and a giant plantation. So she prepared to sell.
Around the same time, Cunningham fell into debt too. Until the 1890s, Cunningham was only producing raw sugar on his plantation, the brown sticky kind. But his customers wanted white refined sugar. So Cunningham invested a significant amount of money into building a new refinery. He also started importing raw sugar from places like Cuba. That way, he could keep the refinery running all year long rather than being tied to the Texas harvest season. But output couldn't keep up with the cost of innovation, and eventually Cunningham's creditors took control of his sugar empire.
What happened next was, in my opinion, pretty shady. Ellis and Cunningham's creditors knew there was plenty of money left to be made in Sugarland, so they moved to take control of both sugar plantations. They installed a man named William T. Eldridge to run day-to-day operations and secured funding from Galveston banker I.H. Kempner. Eldridge was an experienced planter and leaser of convicts, but he was also no stranger to scandal. In the early 1900s, he shot and killed 2 men in separate incidents, both on trains, strangely enough.
He and Kempner incorporated as the Imperial Sugar Company in June 1907, and by November, they owned Ellis's plantation and basically had control over Cunningham's too. It seems their initial plan was to sell both plantations to the state of Texas.
And the state was definitely interested. By 1908, the State Penitentiary Board had purchased 4 convict lease plantations and turned them into state-run prison farms. Public opinion had turned against convict leasing, and the state figured they could make more money if they acted as both landowner and lessee.
Without convict leasing, the state would not have seen how successful that model worked, and then they just cut out the middleman.
This is Ashante Reese, a professor of African and African diaspora studies at the University of Texas at Austin. She's currently researching the history of sugar and Sugarland.
The Department of Criminal Justice rapidly increases their holdings, the acreage that they have, and then start doing the same thing that they were paying other people to do, like to manage prisoners. And so you see this rapid increase. Texas goes from having one solid, permanent prison infrastructure, Huntsville, and then everything kind of like explodes. But they were able to do that because of the kind of capital that is just undeniably connected to the convict lease system.
Eldridge, who was running the plantations, actually made the same argument. Speaking to the press in February 1908, he said, quote, "Sugarcane has never been successfully produced in Texas in any quantity since the abolition of slavery, except with convict labor, so that the state, in extending its operations in this field, will bring them into competition with no one, and will develop an industry that will add millions to the wealth of the state and demonstrate to the world at large what a magnificent garden spot the state has."
Texas followed through with its purchase of the Ellis plantation that February and soon began operating the Imperial prison farm there. But the Imperial Sugar Company decided to hold on to Cunningham's 12,500 acres. And it was on that land that the company town of Sugarland was born.
Sugarland, the city that sugar built.
The official history of the Imperial Sugar Company and the sweet town that rose up around it was written by Robert M. Armstrong and published in 1991. He wrote that his father began working there in 1908 and retired nearly 40 years later as vice president and director of the Imperial Sugar Company. Armstrong followed in his father's footsteps. He grew up in the business and said he was well acquainted with Eldridge and Kempner. He climbed the ranks of Imperial and, as an executive, helped govern the company town.
It's important to keep that context in mind as you read Armstrong's history of Sugarland. He died in 1996, so we asked a colleague to read his description of those company town days.
Crime was almost non-existent. The quiet, conservative lifestyle did not attract the fast movers or the idle. Unlike the stereotype of a company town, this one did not attempt to gouge its employees at the retail level. Mr. Kempner later stated that it wouldn't have made much sense to spend millions to build a company town or to provide good living conditions for the people, only to take an unfair advantage of the price of a 5-cent can of beans. A Sugarland resident was allowed to charge nearly everything to his monthly account. His rent, utilities, groceries, drugs, fuel, gasoline for his car, purchases at the general store, all were included in one monthly bill. Collections were no problem. Everyone knew that if he wanted to keep his job, he had to pay his bills.
He makes it sound so idyllic, and that narrative really stuck. Take this Imperial Sugar advertisement that aired in 2020.
For over 175 years, Imperial Sugar has been the secret ingredient Southern families trust for 100% pure cane sweetness. Imperial Sugar tastes like home.
I always think about, how do I know what I know? And like, what does everything around me tell me I should know about this thing, right? And my experience of Sugarland so far is that everything around me tells me that I should know Imperial is great, Sugarland is wonderful, and how we got here actually doesn't matter.
Ashante Reese told us she was struck by the unshakably positive legacy Imperial Sugar, Sugarland, and the Kempner family have managed to maintain for all these years. But it makes sense when you consider that this history was written by Armstrong, a close friend of the Kempners and a loyal company man.
It's almost unbelievable how often Armstrong's book is cited by historians, archaeologists, and other researchers. It's really the only comprehensive text available on the history of Sugarland and Imperial Sugar. So Armstrong was able to smooth over the cracks and shape the story into something palatable for modern readers. For example, he repeatedly denounced the practice of convict leasing, like in this section.
Their initial plan had to include replacement of the 400-man convict labor force on the farms. Eldridge had previously used convict labor on at least one of the farms he had owned and probably would have continued their use at Sugarland until the state abolished their use as leased labor. But apparently, Mr. Kempner had flatly refused to be associated with the practice, insisting instead on the creation of a permanent, well-chosen workforce as quickly as possible. They attacked the convict program in a hurry. Even before they finalized the Cunningham transaction in 1908, they had moved the entire convict population from the Cunningham farms over to the Ellis plantation.
But that's just not true. We have prison records, legislative investigations, court transcripts, and news reports showing that the Imperial Sugar Company was leasing convicts on Cunningham's former plantation through at least 1912. In fact, as part of the sale of Ellis's plantation, the prison was contractually obligated to sell all the sugarcane convicts harvested there to the Imperial Sugar Company at a fixed price for 10 years.
You know, it comes up, it comes up, it comes up, it comes up. And it's like, what does that even mean when by the time you take over this company, enslaved labor had already prepped the ground for you to be able to be successful in a particular way? But also, what does it mean when you enter into willing agreements with the state, not only selling parcels of land to the state, but entering into contracts so that your company is the sole company that will refine the sugar cane that you know incarcerated men, in this case, are harvesting?
At times, Armstrong himself admits that life in the company town was not completely equitable between the races. The homes in the east side of town, where only white people could live, were 1, 2, and 3 bedroom houses with yards, septic tanks, electricity, gas, and water connections. Whereas the homes built for black and brown employees were, quote,
livable, but in the beginning were without electricity, gas, or indoor plumbing, furnished only with a single water faucet on the back porch.
It was these examples of inequity and abuse that preoccupied Reginald Moore. He spent the last few decades of his life trying to get people to acknowledge the central role black men played in making Sugarland and Imperial Sugar so successful.
I have a dream that one day these free men of neglected and exploited souls would be recognized for their hard works and contributions for Sugarland in constructing this great state of Texas in the Reconstruction era.
For the descendants of the Sugarland 95, and those buried in the real, still undiscovered Bullhead Camp Cemetery, it's important to correct this narrative. Not to diminish the memory some might have of a sweet company town, but to fully appreciate those whose suffering made that life possible.
For Portia Harper, honoring her ancestors means sharing their stories with the next generation. She hopes to one day be able to tell her son about Eve Harper and take him to the real Bullhead Camp Cemetery.
There's nothing that could be done to repair what was lost. Our family has been affected generationally. But I mean, ultimately, the only thing that I can ask for at this time is the truth.
The truth, as Reggie saw it, was bigger than the Sugarland 95, bigger than the real Bullhead Camp Cemetery, bigger even than the thousands of other men and women buried unceremoniously across the state. He saw how the fallout from convict leasing has affected generation after generation and can still be felt today.
It had a trickle-down effect. Slavery and the prison system contributed to some of the afflictions and the PTSD and the situations that people go through.
Taking just Portia's family, for example, when Eve Harper was arrested, his wife and kids lost the head of their household and their primary source of income. This was a husband and father who was never seen or heard from again. If they were aware of his arrest and imprisonment, they'd likely come to fear the constant threat posed by law enforcement. And if they didn't know, they might learn to expect abandonment. It's not hard to see how these fears and experiences led to more and more broken homes, shorter lifespans, and encounters with the criminal justice system.
Our history's been consistently torn apart by law enforcement, covered up by law enforcement. In this story with Sugar Land, it just continued to perpetuate that cover-up.
And Portia says there's no accountability for it.
Hello, how are you doing?
Hey, are you Brandon Jackson?
Yes.
Hi. Sorry, do you have a second? Yes. My name is Brittany Martin. I'm a journalist.
Late one summer day in 2021, Brittany showed up on Brandon Jackson's doorstep and told him we thought his 3 times great-grandfather, Andy Jackson, could be among the Sugar Land 95.
It was a lot of information to dump on him all at once, but after he'd taken some time to review it and speak with his family, we met up for coffee.
When I first learned of that story, never in a million years where I thought one of my ancestors could possibly have been there, because I thought they were all still there in East Texas.
Most of Brandon's family has lived in East Texas for generations, but from a young age, he remembers being warned to leave, to avoid getting tied up in the criminal justice system.
So that was a big stigma in our family. It was just like, jail is a possibility, a likelihood. If you stay out here, this is what's going to happen, because there's nothing.
Brandon told us many members of his extended family have served time behind bars, mostly for nonviolent drug offenses, and he's seen how hard it is for them to readjust to normal life when they get out.
The mentality, the life of jail changes you. Just the idea of the point of no return. Being at the precipice of that, seeing the sign, seeing the writing on the wall, knowing, hey man, when I go in here, I'm probably not coming out. And it's tragic. And it leads to a sense of just being desperate. And you live a life of that, and you pass that on to your children even. Just don't ever let this happen to you. And if it happens to you, then, essentially you just give up.
It was a similar observation that first led Reginald Moore to look into convict leasing.
I got involved because I was a correctional officer, and I worked in the prison system in 85 through 88, and I saw when the crack epidemic came in and the prisons exploded. When I started working there, we had approximately 20 prisons, and it went from 20 prisons to over 100 as they speak now.
Racially biased sentencing was to blame. The mandatory minimum sentence for someone holding a small amount of crack cocaine far exceeded those faced by people holding small amounts of powder cocaine.
As he watched the black prison population grow, Reggie became deeply concerned by the conditions he observed. His wife Marilyn told us,
working in there and seeing how they were treated and those kind of things, it reminded him of slavery.
And he's not the only one who got that impression. Here's Portia Harper again.
My uncle Ephraim, he's currently incarcerated in Texas right now, and he was telling me that they still do convict leasing to a certain extent. He was out there picking fruit off of one of the plantations, and I was like, just the irony.
Even after all this time, Texas prisons still hold tight to their agricultural roots. In 2019, the Texas Department of Criminal Justice reported that inmates farmed cotton, grains, and grasses on nearly 27,000 acres of land. Inmates harvested 7.8 million pounds of vegetables, raised 13,000 cows, 16,500 pigs, and 230,000 hens, who laid approximately 48 million eggs.
On top of all that farm work, Texas prisoners are still made to do a bunch of the same jobs Ward Dewey and Co. had them doing in Huntsville way back in the 1870s. They make furniture, clothes, even the nice leather chairs lawmakers sit in at the Texas Capitol. All those products and many, many more are manufactured and sold under the umbrella of Texas Correctional Industries, or TCI. Today, any government-funded entity can buy products from TCI, which includes schools, courts, cities, and state agencies like the DPS or DMV. Inmates also perform services like repairing school buses, installing auditorium seating, and Braille transcription. All of these sales and services net the state, on average, $50 million in revenue each year. According to a 2017 analysis by the Prison Policy Initiative, inmates in the U.S. receive, on average, between 33 cents and $1.41 per hour to do prison and industry jobs like these. But Texas is one of just a handful of states that pays its inmates nothing for their work.
And it wasn't really until after the Sugarland 95 were discovered that people started looking to change that. In 2020, the city of Houston needed the tires retreaded on their fleet vehicles, so they put out an invitation to bid on the project. They got 2 responses, one from Southern Tire Mart for $4.9 million, and another from Texas Correctional Industries for $4.2 million.
TCI can charge less because they don't have to factor in labor costs, so obviously they won the bid.
The contract landed on the desks of 2 Houston City Council women, Abby Kamen and Carolyn Evans Shabazz. Approving city contracts is part of their normal everyday job, but this one stopped them in their tracks. We spoke to Evans Shabazz back in 2021. She represents Southeast Houston and graduated from Reginald Moore's alma mater, Jack Yates High School.
It bothers me that they don't get anything because some of these prisoners don't have family support, and so they don't get anything. They actually can't even make a phone call. So that really, really bothered me, and I didn't want to be a part of that.
The councilwomen sent the contract back to Houston Mayor Sylvester Turner and asked him to put out a new request for bids exclusively from companies who agreed to pay their employees. Within a few months, the city had signed a contract with Southern Tire Mart. Councilmember Evan Shabazz said the extra cost was well worth it.
Money at the expense of the integrity of people is not worth it to me. I just want people to be looked at as people, as human beings.
In 2019, Democratic State Representative Victoria Niave Criado introduced a bill in the Texas House which would require the state to pay inmates at least $1 for each day they worked. The proposal's fiscal note estimated that the change would cost the state $31.5 million per year, which is about $20 million less than the state gets in revenue from TCI sales. That bill didn't pass, but Evan Shabazz hopes to see future action from the legislature.
They work, I think, up to 12 hours a day, and they are punished if they do not participate. A lot of the incarcerated are African American, just like me. And of course, a lot of them, if they're not Black, they're brown in all likelihood. And so I don't really think that that's an equitable system, and it reeks of slavery to me. And that, of course, is not a relic that I would like to see in any form in our system.
Current and formerly incarcerated people and their families stressed to us that paying these men and women for their work would go a long way towards humanizing them and providing them with very real, necessary support. Living in prison isn't free. You have to pay to make phone calls, receive health care, and buy basic essentials like deodorant, soap, and tampons.
There's a lot of things that you need to still buy in prison, like fans for your cell when it's 110 degrees and the prison's not air conditioned.
This is journalist Carrie Blakinger. She covered Texas prisons for years and now works for the Los Angeles Times.
I think there's this sort of idea that people in prison are just spending their money buying, Snickers and Little Debbie's on commissary. But it's actually a lot more basic things than that you need to buy.
Carrie knows what she's talking about, and not just because of her reporting. Before becoming a criminal justice writer, she served nearly 2 years in prison herself.
After Naomi and I visited a number of state and local archives and had thoroughly sifted through countless tales of Texas prison history, I started to notice that Carrie was reporting on eerily similar conditions in Texas prisons today.
They're behind razor wire. They're their own kingdoms. Anything goes.
During the convict lease era, there was no air conditioning, heating, or indoor plumbing in the convict barracks. The restrooms, called closets at the time, were literally just that. They were located right off of the bunk rooms, within feet of the convicts' beds. There was no way to flush out waste, so it piled up in there. The smell was mentioned many times in reporting on these camps. The guards themselves testified that no human should have to sleep in those conditions. Unfortunately, more than 100 years later, Carrie had a similar story for us.
There's one guy who had been having long-standing plumbing problems that he'd been sending me video of. There was sewage coming in the cell through the ceiling from the floor above. It was sewage water. So it was brown and smelly. It was dripping down the side of the wall. So he built a little barrier out of soap because they give them tons of these little green squares of lye soap. So he built a little barrier out of the soap and directed fans towards it to try to blow the sewage out into the hallway.
More than 2/3 of Texas prisons don't have air conditioning where inmates sleep, despite the fact that temperatures soar into the hundreds most summers, like this one. It was bad enough to read about all the men who died of sunstroke on the Sugarland farms during the convict lease era, but now they're dying in their cells.
Physical conditions aside, perhaps the most glaring, heartbreaking similarity we could see between convict leasing and modern-day imprisonment is the lack of humanity ascribed to incarcerated people.
Working or living in a prison, even in the best-case scenario, is inherently traumatizing on some level. And to every degree that you make the conditions worse and worse, you're increasing the amount of trauma, and you're also increasing how difficult it is to come back from that. Because aside from the trauma, this is also just reinforcing this message that you're worthless and you have nothing to offer and you are some sort of subhuman. And over time, these are really powerful messages.
Brandon Jackson said the same. He's felt the constant threat of imprisonment hanging over him his entire life.
My mom to this day will tell me, you're a decision away. And if I had a child, I would teach them the same, because unfortunately that's my reality. I've seen it. I've seen it happen too often, and I don't know that it'll ever change, honestly. It's just, that's what systemic racism is.
Most Black parents in America have some version of the talk with their kids. It's a conversation about anti-Black racism and the threat of violence or death they might face one day because of the color of their skin. The criminal justice system, or the criminal system of injustice, as Yusuf Salaam puts it, is often a source of fear for Black children. Learning to navigate anti-Black racism is crucial for their survival. Despite the repeal of Black codes and PIG laws, Black people today still live with the threat of incarceration or death for just existing.
Brandon said the same. He attended Prairie View A&M at the same time as Sandra Bland. In 2015, Bland was pulled over near campus for reportedly failing to signal when she changed lanes. The conversation between the officer and Bland grew heated, and he violently pulled her out of her car and arrested her. 3 days later, she was found hanged in her jail cell.
My family taught me, take the ticket and go, because it's going to be worse. And then I'm a bigger guy. So I'm intimidating already. I'm a walking justification to get killed. And so I live by that. I don't yell. I don't talk loud. I really try to stay to myself because I know that I can be looked at as a threat to certain people.
Though Brandon and his great-great-great-grandfather, Andy Jackson, lived in vastly different times, they both faced the same risks that come with just living as a Black man in Texas.
I'm a U.S. citizen. I pay taxes. I own my home, but I have to live my life like I'm a visitor here. Because if I move too quick, if I say something wrong, that could be the end of my life, or at least the end of my freedom.
The hunt is on and we're the prey.
Back in 2017, before the Sugarland 95 cemetery was unearthed, before anyone knew for sure it was there, Reggie called into C-SPAN to talk about race and criminal justice reform.
Policing was started in the slave patrol, and they still had that mentality. They feel like they have a free reign to be able to shoot and kill and be the court. More than 2/3 of the people in the world are being incarcerated here in America. So I believe that we need to have an overview and oversight of our criminal justice system so that we can have more respect and admiration of us and don't look at Black people as prey.
For Reggie, the relationship between convict leasing and mass incarceration was always crystal clear. His friend Jay Jenkins said that's why Reggie devoted so much of his life to this work. He wanted everyone to see it and to act.
Reggie sort of put all that in order and made it real, even before the bodies were discovered, made it real in a way that really, for me, like, it was a light bulb moment where it was like, this is the link in the chain between enslavement and mass incarceration today. And when people ask, how could those possibly be linked because they happen so far apart? That's your answer right there.
Sam Collins, who served on the city task force with Reggie, said recognizing this history and its repercussions is necessary. But it's just step one.
You know, James Baldwin says to be Negro in America and somewhat conscious is to be in a constant rage. And you know, it's somewhat conscious. What if you were all the way conscious? You know, it's just, oh my God. To be ignorant of the situation, initially you think, well, it's better, but then you're still being exploited too. We have to call these things out so that they can improve and get better. But there's really sometimes a power structure that just doesn't want things to get better.
So, where does all this leave us? Well, the Fort Bend Independent School District still owns the Sugarland 95 Cemetery and still calls it Bullhead. In 2020, the school district's social studies curriculum coordinator, Chastity Alainu Alade, stepped into a new role created to educate and lead engagement around the Sugarland 95 discovery and memorialization.
As a school district, we have one order of business. It's to teach students. We teach students history, we teach students math, science. And so upon the discovery, we decided that our local history is important.
This is Chastity. She said Fort Bend ISD students now learn about convict leasing in their history classrooms. Other students across the state can choose to take African American history as an elective to learn more about the Sugarland 95 specifically.
But the lessons, as Chastity describes them, are fairly open-ended, and apparently that's by design. She called the approach inquiry-based learning. Basically, you present students with archival records, reports, and photos, and ask them to interpret what they see. During one presentation to a local history group, Chastity displayed photos of Black children in prison stripes standing in fields.
So when we're teaching about the Sugarland 95, if we pose the question, who are the Sugarland 95? Most of them say, I don't know. And then you show them these images and you say, based off of these images, what do you see? And they say, well, we see prisoners. And how do you know? Well, they're in stripes. Okay, what else do you see? And they say, well, they're African American. Well, how do you know? Well, obviously there's their skin. So kids may draw their own inferences and conclusions based off of the resources, the primary sources, newspaper articles, letters, contracts, journals. They learn it for themselves as it occurred in history.
In 2022, Chastity oversaw the opening of an exhibit inside the James Reese Career and Technical Center, highlighting the research conducted by Principal Research Group. The windows overlooking the cemetery are covered with transparent images of sugarcane stalks and birds flying overhead.
The school district paid Boston-based architecture firm Mass Design Group $170,000 to design an outdoor memorial/learning space around the cemetery. But the district's attorney told us that funding to actually carry out the project has not been secured. In fact, he said having Fort Bend ISD fund the memorial at all would be, quote, a stretch. Archaeologist Rain Clark left Principal Research Group in January 2023, leaving bioarchaeologist Katrina Banks-Whitley in charge. Abigail Fisher now serves as the group's vice president and analyst, and Helen Graham is the director of genealogical and historical research and family outreach. As of May 2023, they have offered no further updates on their work.
Deborah Bolnick and Sam Archer continue their genetic analysis of the Sugarland 95 at the University of Connecticut, but are looking for guidance from descendants or a representative descendant community. They've said they feel their primary responsibility is to these men and their descendants, and they are working to protect their genetic information.
At the time of publication, there has been no formal organization of a descendant community. For
Jack Mitchell,
Andy Jackson,
Ephraim Harper,
Watt Bonner,
and the thousands of others who fell victim to the convict lease system, we hope the work we've done and will keep doing furthers that effort. For now, we will continue to tell their stories. Sugarland is a production of the Texas Newsroom and was completed with the support of a grant from Columbia University's Ira A. Littman Center for Journalism and Civil and Human Rights, with funding provided by Arnold Ventures, and a grant from the Convict Leasing and Labor Project. Sugarland is written and reported by Brittany Martin and Naomi Reed. Our editor is Rachel Osier Lindley. Engineering and sound design by Jacob Rosati. Fact-checking by Billy Brennan. Audio editing by Bennett Smith. Music by Jerron Marshall. Recording engineering by Jake Perlman. Production help from Rafa Fariha. Special thanks to Amanda Foke and the Woodson Research Center at Rice University's Fondren Library, and to Southwestern University's Smith Library for allowing us to use your audio studios. To the nonprofit collective Lawyers for Reporters and the SMU Dedman School of Law's First Amendment Clinic for providing our team with pro bono legal assistance. To Joanne Farian at Columbia University and Bruce Oster and Liana Simstrom at NPR for helping us figure out how to tell our story. To all who participated in our listening sessions, including Anna Campbell, Terry Fox, Matt Largy, Erica Howard, Ariel Worthy, Micaela Rodriguez, Robert Salinas, Raul Alonso, Brianna O'Higgins, and Aaron Texera. To Jody Jacobson, Nidra Lee, Jennifer Toon, and Christoph Perfect for lending us your expertise. And to the many, many friends, colleagues, and strangers who offered us advice, assistance, and grace along the way. Thank you. The Texas Newsroom is a public radio journalism collaboration that includes NPR, KERA in North Texas, Houston Public Media, KUT in Austin, Texas Public Radio in San Antonio, and other stations across the state. Corey McLagan is the statewide managing editor. The Texas Newsroom received support for Sugarland from Frontline's Local Journalism Initiative, which is funded by the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Visit sugarlandpodcast.com to learn more about everything we discuss in this series.